Hey everyone, so in this video I am going to be doing male expressions. I'm going to be doing the very basic kinds like happy, sad, and mad. Of course there's different types of these genres, there's different types of expressions for each genre, but I'm just going to be going through with, some just our very basic types. So if you'll see in my character and backgrounds course, and on the expression section for both male and female, I do a 25 essential expression and kind of draw the character expressions using story. If you're interested in that, go ahead and do that and watch that. This one will just be very basic, similar to my characters and illustrations course, just because I don't have enough time to go through everything. So let's go ahead and get started. Just first of all, once again, we draw our male face. So I'm going to be doing this 3 times, so I will actually do one and then I'll pause and then I will go ahead and continue on with the rest. So once again, we're going to be doing a happy, sad, and mad. We're going to be doing one view, the straight view, just because it's the easiest way to do it, and it's also simple. So here we have our cranium and our cross line. Just draw your basic shape. Sometimes you don't always need the cross lines and kind of estimating where it is. You can sometimes just draw it and just see. Sometimes that's just how it works for me. So I like to kind of bend it almost halfway, and then I like to just bring it up. So sometimes it's also by eye, but I make sure that the top is a little bit wide, and as it goes down, it is also what's it called? Wide and then thin from the bottom. So I like that kind of dynamic look just because it feels better. And once again, I'm going to be putting in my my proportion lines. So eyes, halfway, nose, halfway, mouth. And this will change depending on the situation here. Eyebrows, and then hairline, which I will put a little bit above here. And of course, we're going to add in the neck, which is going to be rather broad because it's a guy. And then we're going to add in the trapezius, which is our back muscle that kind of extends towards the neck. And that is our one head. And I'm just going to add in the ears as a placeholder. So that'll be good for now. I'm going to pause and then I'm going to go ahead and restart once I finish all 3. Alright, here are our 3 heads. I couldn't get them super perfect, but anyways, that'll be good for now. As long as they look relatively similar, I am okay with that. In fact, maybe I could probably even give them different personalities or something. In fact, that would actually be pretty cool. Maybe I'll do that. So anyways, let's get started with our happy face, our very cheerful guy. So maybe we'll give him a cheerful kind of look. They're friends or something and they have like a main trait or something. Anyways, so let's get started with the face. When it comes to happy face, I'm going to be drawing a happy guy here, so maybe a more cuter look, just because. Of course, this will vary depending on the character that you have. If you have a guy with slanted eyes, make it just slightly rounder and slightly more open, so that everything will look more bright. So if I'm going to make it a rounder eye, I'm going to go ahead and round this out more. I always like to start off with the right eye because that's the best eye that I can do traditionally. I always like to do the right one because I'm right-handed, so this is easier for me. So I like to make it round. Let me zoom in a little bit more. There. And then, of course, because his eyes are a little bit more narrow, I'm just going to round it just a little bit. And then what I also like to do at the eyelid afterwards, I like to make the eyebrows just a little bit more like more tilted up. So not like slanted down, but more like arching. The arch is higher. And then for his eyes, I like to give it a more open eye or more open look by leaving a little bit of breathing room on top. And then I like to also give a little bit of a tilt at the bottom of his eyes just to show that maybe his cheekbones are kind of rising and he's very overjoyed. And of course I also like to add a bit of a blush And some blushes are, you can do the classic anime blush, which is like this. But another way you can do it is more like, like a side cross hatching as well. You don't have to do that though, but this is something that's very, very customizable. So now let's go on the other side. Now once again, one eye apart, kind of just measure that about up to here. Now of course this is an estimate, but I still want to make sure that everything is nicely matched. So I'm going to make sure that my eye is nicely, it is the same length. Of course I'll erase all of these lines later, but I want to also give some breathing room between the ends of the eyes as well. So I want to make sure that they're also the same length. And that also just comes through observation. So sometimes when I was little, I would always get the distance wrong and also the length of the eye wrong, because it didn't set into my mind yet. It didn't set, and I wasn't good at estimating yet. So this takes time to estimate, like seeing which eye, Sometimes it would even help if you take the length of the eye and then just, put it here, which is pretty similar, pretty similar. But you can do that as well if you want. Sometimes it just takes time in the end. Or if you're digital, try not to do this, but I do this because I know how to do this already and I can get it pretty accurate. Take this and just flip it to the other side. Now the problem with that is that your drawing is going to look more static because it's so even. And some people, when they draw the whole eye already, this is digital by the way. For instance, they do the whole highlights and everything, In fact, for the guy here, I'm going to add more highlights just to give it a more shiny look. So they would flip this, and then the eyebrow and the highlights would be reversed, so it looks like he's kind of cross-eyed, but not really. You're going to have to change the highlights to the same direction as this eye, but that's besides the point. We're doing this traditionally, so you don't have to worry about that too much. So once again, I am making sure that the eye has some breathing room, and the bottom is a little bit tilted, or kind of a little bit like curved. And I'm adding more highlights just to give it a more shiny look. I'm only partially shading it just to give it more liveliness. And then once again, I'm going to draw the eyebrow. Notice how I always start thick on the front and then thin it out later. Of course, if you need to adjust between the two, go ahead and do that. And of course, our blush, because who can forget about that? Now, when it comes to the features of the nose and stuff, we can erase these lines here because we don't. That's kind of a bit annoying to look at. I would put his nose a little bit higher this time, just because it gives a more youthful appearance. And that I would make his mouth more open. So to do an open mouth, it's not a triangle. It's not like this. It's more like a curved version of it. It's just more curved. So you can draw 2 points. Make sure it's not too wide. Too wide will be up to here. That's way too wide. And too narrow will be, here. So the reason why is that when we smile, the length of our mouth kind of changes because when we stretch our mouth. So we stretch our lips, and that's why it's a little bit wider, but it's not super wide. So I would say a good gauge would be about here. And even then it may look a little bit long, but we can always adjust that. So notice how I also make sure that my middle is a bit blank. I like to just, I like to indicate that this is like a full mouth, but I don't want to make a bold statement. So once again, I always like to draw the two lines like so. And same thing with the bottom. I kind of like to indicate the corners of the mouth as well as little dots. And then we can add the teeth. By the way, do not draw the teeth like linearly. Like just only leave a white space like this. The reason is because when you if you look far away and someone smiles at you, you only see a single value on their teeth. It's only when you go very, very little, there's not much value in between the teeth cracks, So usually it's best when it's simplified as one value rather than, multiple lines like this. So I'm gonna, whoops, that's a bad one here. But anyways, I'm gonna roll with it. So let's say I'm just shading this in here. Let's say I put a lot of teeth here. That looks really creepy. You don't want to do that to your drawing because that's not how it is in real life. That's too dark. In real life, our teeth aren't this dark when it comes to the cracks. That's just your imagination, or that's just your human instincts wanting to make something detailed. So always simplify it with just a simple white teeth strip, and you're good. So that is our happy expression. Let's add some hair to this guy. And because this guy is, nice and cheerful, maybe he could have some wavy hair or some curly hair. Friendly, something friendly. So actually, maybe let's give him a widow's peak, or parted bangs. So parted bangs always start from the hairline, and then you can draw a little M that curves down. So this will be your starting point. Let's draw in the inside of the hair, just because that gives a more bit of depth and value. So I'm going to be erasing this head here, just because this is too dark, and I want to draw over the hair. Or draw over the head. Once again, we draw in the bangs, so they curve. If you want, you can even layer. So you can even use multiple layers of bangs. So notice how this is one strand, this is the second strand, and then this is the third. And notice how I'm overlapping all the time because that shows value, that shows a depth. But it's the same process over and over. And then here we have the center of his hair. We can add a little cowlick just for some nice, friendly look. Whoops, let me zoom out. Sorry about that. So that's what his head looks like so far. Let me zoom out even more. And to make sure that his hair is not completely flat, I'm going to make some strands that kind of poke out of his head. And then once again, I am going to add the bottom of his hair. So that is how you draw a happy guy. Very nice and friendly. I could have given him a name, but I'm not going to because I don't think I'm going to draw him again. But, very simple. So now let's go for a more sad character. I might have to split this video into multiple, but I'm going to try to get it all into one video. So, sad guy, maybe he has a more depressing look, maybe he's the pessimist guy here. This is quite fun, I think. Sad expressions are always kind of fun. So let's go ahead and zoom in once again, and let's start off with the face. So let's always characterize them by their eyes. For this kind of guy, I like to make it more droopy and more slanted downward, kind of like a flirty but gloomy eye. So notice how I erased a lot of the stuff. That's just my preference. I don't like to have a lot of lines distracting me, so that's why I erase. But I still make sure to keep my measurements pretty on point. So in this case, I would make his eyes a little bit droopier, so kind of like downward slope. Notice how his eyelids are also droopy slope, and notice how I always thicken first. Since he's more of a pessimistic guy, maybe he could be looking towards the side. And notice how, because he's not bright and lively, I made the eyeball more full, more filling the eye, rather than an open eye like this. It's more filled in. So let me go ahead and zoom in once again. And I'm going to add a highlight, and then add in the pupil. So notice that one highlight gives automatically a more gloomy look compared to this one because this is not as shiny. Of course, not every one highlight or not every highlight that you put in that's just only a single highlight makes it sad. It's just sad compared to this guy here. So once again, I'm going to measure across. So one eye apart, about up to here. And I'm going to draw the other eye, making sure that it's a similar slant and a similar size. And then the eyelid, I like to keep it thick on the front and then thin at the back. So notice how I don't make the eyes very big. That's just because when it comes to guys, it's safer to have it smaller, or else they look too feminine. I hope my headphones aren't like grating against my light. Sometimes that does that, and I'm like, "Eey, that might make a sound." So sorry about that if you guys hear that sometimes in the video. Anyways, so once again, we draw in our highlight and give it a gloomy look. He's looking to the side. He's kind of like unsure of the situation here. And to make a more sad look, you want the eyebrow also to be slanting up. I have a lot of smudging because I've been like, I always have multiple drawings on multiple pieces of paper. So, try not to smudge, guys. Well, it's inevitable at this point. The nose will be pretty similar. If you want, you can have a more solemn look by just drawing two little lines that slant downward once again. You can add a little bit of tears as well. You know, maybe he's tearing up at something. And you're good with that. So for his hair, let's give him something more emotional. Let's give him a more a plainer, straighter hairstyle. So maybe let's have his hair kind of covering his eye a little bit. He's kind of shy and withdrawn. He's kind of like not really good with people. So I'm going to make one side of his eye more blocked. So it's not the kind of emo kind of hairstyle that you see in some animes. It's just more of a withdrawn. So in fact, hairstyle is a really good way to show personality. So instead of making just one eye appear blocked, I'm going to make his whole eye like kind of more, his whole bangs kind of just hiding his face a little bit because he's more shy. And notice that even though I don't have an origin point, I'm still making sure that everything is wrapping around the head. And I have at the top of his head here. In fact, let's give his hair some length. I'm not entirely sure exactly how far to go from here, but I think a good way, I think this is a good length actually. In fact, I'd make his face just a little bit slimmer, just as like a personality thing. Because he's more shy, he's not as outgoing as the other guy, his face is a little bit slimmer. Therefore, it kind of shows that more submissive look. And let's actually make his neck a little bit thinner as well, just because it's more of a personality thing. So his is quite broad, normal, I would say average. And this guy is more slim because he's kind of weaker. And then we can add the back of the hair like so. So I think that looks pretty good. Pretty nice. Maybe his name's Arnold and his name's Mike, I don't know. But anyways, that's how you do a sad expression. And now finally we have our anger expression. This guy's going to be a hothead, so I might actually add some spiky hair to this guy. As you can see, I'm kind of just putting in hair just because it's nicer it's just more full and nice. But this guy is going to have a really sharp feature. So I'm going to sharpen more of his features and broaden more of his features to show that he's bigger than the guys around him. And also, I would also add some shading on at the bottom of his neck or underneath his head, just because it shows more contrast and more aggressiveness. So instead of, the plain kind of nose here, I'm actually going to indicate the triangular part of the nose because I'm going to add some wrinkles. So I'm going to add some wrinkles here. Just because when we scrunch our eyebrows, it becomes this kind of scrunched up look, and that's kind of like a scowling face. So let me go ahead and zoom in. I like to draw the nose first on this kind of guy here because it's just easier to kind of just also visualize where the eyes are later on. So in this case, I'm going to make his nose a little bit more broader or just more bolder rather than, dainty like this one. I'm going to kind of go full on nose here. So I'm going to be going and drawing the bottom of the nose and a little bit of the nostrils. This is another type of nose here. And I'm going to be just kind of drawing the sides of the nose as well. So if you notice if you feel your nose, there's like some padding on the sides of your nose here. I'm indicating that part. So by indicating more features onto the guy, you get a more expressionable look. And for the eyebrows, I'm going to go straight in downward, and then I'm going to add a flap of skin, kind of like charging downward. And I like to kind of just go on the extremes here, just because it's easy. So notice how everything's all super downward, and there's like a crease in between his eyes and everything. And I'm making his eyes really, really wide open this time, because he's like really like out of his mind here. Maybe like one of his friends, well, oh no, maybe some guys are bullying this guy. And he's like, hey, don't bully my friend. So I have to cough, but I don't want to. I'll try to hold it in for now. You can emphasize the expression by making the pupils a lot smaller. Hopefully that wasn't very loud. I had a cough. In fact, to add more expression, you can add more wrinkles around his eyes, and also add some grayness here as well, or just kind of like these extra lines, because it just shows more personality. In fact, I'm going to bring the nose up just a little bit here, because that looks a little bit too low. Shade the other side just to give it some nice depth. If you want to draw a shouting face, make sure that there's a thin and thick feel. So there's a thickness to the ends. In fact, I'm actually going to make it a little bit wider because he's like shouting at someone. In fact, I'm actually going to I'm going to erase this one, and I'm just going to make a shouting. So shouting lips or shouting mouths are more like boxy, and they have like a kind of like a crease over here just to show that the motion of the muscles are going downward. And you can also add some demon teeth or some monster teeth to show that extra aggressiveness, and also even just some action lines to show that he's shouting at somebody. So I'm also going to erase this part because this looks a little bit too thin around the sides. So I'm going to just thicken these areas just a little bit. And I'm also going to add a little bit of like spit around his face because, when you're shouting, spit comes out, right? And this guy, let me think of what kind of hairstyle for this guy I would have. Probably something more interesting. Actually, I don't know if I want to. Maybe I'll just I don't really do shaved heads very often, so I'll do a shaved head. So a shaved head was pretty simple. It's not completely bald. I'm making his head a little bit flat on the top because our heads are a little bit flat on the top. It's not completely round. In fact, we're going to give him a little vein here because that shows that he's really angry. Hairline, you can also show the hairline up on top. The hairline kind of wraps around the head and around the ear. Kind of like in an oval, round shape that kind of wraps around the head. It's kind of like a head cap. In fact, actually, I have an idea. So rather than a shaved head, I'm probably going to do very short buzz cut head. So let's give him widow's peak, which is a little dip in the center. And I'm going to draw these little lines here because his hair is short, but I want to show his hairline. And I want to just kind of travel it down his ears here. 22 minutes in, not too bad, but that's a bit longer than usual. And I'm going to be drawing, just indicating hair here. Because notice how, in this case, because we know where his head and his scalp is, we can just draw the outside shape in this case. We can even draw some action lines underneath, all these little corners around the eyes just to give it some more action and more aggressiveness. Let's give him piercing as well for some characterization. But yeah, notice how compared to this hair has more strands because it's more straight and you can see more directness. But for spiky hair like this, it's better to indicate with an outside silhouette. And notice how I don't have all the silhouettes like a similar shape like this. It's varied. Well, that's kind of varied as well. It's not like I have to try hard not to vary it. It's not the same shape. It's more like short, long, long, short, long, kind of a different shape language. So doing that throughout your hair gives it a much more personality into your hair. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. I did a angry expression, a sad one, and then a happy one. Three friends who have vastly different character types. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.